Great panel coming up later on with Janet Albrechtson and James Patterson from the IPA. We will be looking at that Bill Shorten interview, also be looking at the disintegration of the Palmer United Party, and we'll also be looking at the lifestyle choices issue. Just who is it who is completely focused on so-called lifestyle choices? But first up, I caught up with Finance Minister Matthias Cormann in Canberra a few moments ago. Matthias Cormann, thanks for joining Viewpoint again.
Good to be back.
I want to talk about some of the reform issues you'll be looking at in the lead up to the budget, and of course there's been a lot of talk about superannuation. Now, is it a good idea for first home owners, first home buyers to be able to access some of their superannuation savings to get into the real estate market? Is it a good idea, as Tony Abbott suggests, or a bad idea, as Malcolm Turnbull says?
Well, Tony Abbott didn't say it's a good idea. He said it's an idea worth having a conversation about.
Yeah, he said it was a good idea worth having a look at.
And look, I mean, obviously this has been brought up from time to time. My view on these matters is on the record. I was quite explicit in October, November last year when I was asked questions about it. Clearly, I mean, when it comes to housing affordability, the issue that we're facing as a nation is a supply issue. The price of anything, including the price of housing, is a function of supply and demand. You know, if we want to genuinely and sustainably improve housing affordability, we've got to increase supply. And all of us, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, Malcolm Turnbull, myself, we all understand that. Now, you know, from time to time, people put to us a proposition that young people, first home buyers, should be allowed to access their superannuation. You know, personally, I don't believe that that is a good idea.
Well, see, the opposite is it's the issue that the country is grappling with, as outlined really, of course, in that intergenerational report, is the elderly, the retired, and how to fund pensions and the like. So this is the opposite of what we should be doing, isn't it? Talking about this sort of issue, the idea people accessing savings early. What you need to be focusing on is ways of encouraging people to put more money into superannuation so that they're not reliant on pensions at the end of the day.
Well, it's a bit more involved than that. I mean, it's true that obviously we need to encourage Australians to save in order to be able to look after their needs in retirement as much as possible. Of course, that is self-evident. But obviously, with increasing life expectancy, which is a good thing, all of us live longer, healthier, there will be a structural change to the way we work throughout our whole life. And I guess the conversation that the Treasurer is very keen for people to have and for us to pursue is that, well, you know, the structure of our career through a lifetime might well be quite different, is likely to be quite different to what it has been in years gone by, and you know, how does that impact the way we structure things like superannuation and pension arrangements. And obviously our challenge as a country to ensure that we are in the strongest possible position moving forward is to convince as many older Australians to stay in the workforce for longer, so that we don't have an excessive drag on economic growth from the falling workforce participation rates that come with an ageing population. And also because right now the number of Australians of traditional working age as a proportion of the number of Australians 65 and over continues to decline, so there are fewer and fewer working taxpayers funding the needs of a growing population in the older age brackets. And so in that sort of context, we do need to have a conversation about how we sensibly adjust some of the vehicles that we've had in place for a long time, and including how we can perhaps improve flexibility for people to save towards their retirement throughout a working life.
Well, you need more than a conversation, don't you? You need to have reforms in this budget, in the second Abbott budget coming up in only 8 or 9 weeks. And one of the areas where you could find extra money, find some savings for the budget and deliver on fairness in superannuation would be to get rid of some of the concessions, or curb some of the superannuation concessions for wealthier Australians, for the higher earning Australians. Are you looking at those superannuation concessions as a budget measure?
Well, we made very clear commitments in the lead up to the last election that we wouldn't make any negative, unexpected changes.
Matthias Cormann, undertakings before the election haven't stopped you introducing other changes. Are you going to look at those superannuation concessions for the high income earners?
Well, what I was about to say before you jumped in after my first sentence and a half was that what we've said all the way through was that in the context of the tax white paper review process, obviously we'll be looking at the whole tax system, because I mean what you're essentially asking me is whether we are looking at increasing taxes on superannuation savings, and that's the question that you're asking me. Our view overall is that we want to actually continue to reduce the tax burden in the economy so we can strengthen economic growth and so that we can increase the opportunity for everyone to get ahead. Now the question is how within an overall envelope of taxes, tax revenue being raised, how can we do that in the simplest, most efficient, fairest and best possible way, and that is of course what the tax white paper review process will explore. I'm not going to preempt what will come out of that process except to say that we are going into the conversation with an open mind.
Okay, well, feeding into this whole scenario, of course, is pensions. Now, it fits into the superannuation arrangements, of course. It also touches on the real estate issues, and you're looking at reforms at the moment that will claw back on the rate of increase of the pension payments, age pension payments. Wouldn't it be better and fairer, I dare say, to be looking right now at getting rid or tightening up the eligibility requirements for the age pension, especially for wealthy Australians? Wealthy Australians should not be receiving the age pension.
Well, wealthy Australians shouldn't be receiving the age pension. You're quite right. I mean, the age pension is a safety net, and it's a means-tested safety net. Right now we have the income test and the asset test, which are both part of a means test to ensure that the pension is appropriately well targeted. And in the budget last year, not only did we make an adjustment in the period beyond the next election, incidentally, to the rate of indexation, we actually also proposed to tighten the means test by freezing the eligibility thresholds for 3 years from 2017 onwards.
So Matthias Cormann, the key issue here, the elephant in the room, if you like, the one that neither side of politics will touch, is the family home. And we've had NatSem research just recently showing that there's 260,000 families in this country that have net worth of over $3 million that are receiving $1.4 billion in government payments. Now, a large slice of that is age pensioners. If pensioners are sitting in family homes that are worth $2, $3, $4 million, it is simply unfair for them, isn't it, to be living from taxpayers, from the benefits of taxpayers. Effectively, taxpayers are subsidising a tax-free inheritance for these people's children.
Well, obviously the family home has got a particularly important value, and we've been very clear that we are not planning in any way, shape or form to include the family home into the means test for the pension. Now, having said that, I mean, and I think if you listen carefully to what I said in response to your previous question, in the budget last year we actually did have a measure which sought to tighten the means test in a sensible fashion. And I mean, what we set out to do in the budget last year was to make sure that the changes we made, that the reforms that we pursued, had a gradual impact, did not have essentially made the transition, made the adjustment as easy and as straightforward as people as possible. Like so, on the indexation side, we essentially proposed to change the measure of indexation. Incidentally, right now, while the pension can be indexed by CPI or male total average weekly earnings, it is actually being indexed by CPI because CPI is running higher than male total average weekly earnings as an index. And secondly.
But that's fine on the mean testing, and I agree that you are looking at reforms there, tough reforms that are going to save the budget considerable sums. But in the end, the key here is the family home. While you don't touch that, you're never getting a fair representation of assets. Now, both the Henry Tax Commission review under Labor and your own Audit Commission suggested that you should count in assets in the family home, whether it's above $1 million or you can set it higher. When there's an asset there over that amount, you could deem that there are earnings coming from those assets. I mean, it's the only fair way to stop people living in $2, $3, $4 million houses and still getting the age pension.
But family homes don't generate income. That's the point, right?
But they can. But we know they can.
Well,
we know that they can, and if people take the pension rather than draw down on their family home's value, then taxpayers are just ensuring that the children inherit more from the family home, tax-free, rather than people actually living off their savings.
I mean, look, when there's obviously a particular emotional connection that people have to their family home, and as a government we respect that. The point, though, is here that we are making adjustments, and we have put forward in the budget last year adjustments that are designed to be as gradual as possible to make sure that the transition to a more sustainable pension system into the future is as easy as possible. And by making an adjustment, a slight adjustment, both to the rate of indexation and also by ever so gradually increasing the means test or tightening the means test by freezing the eligibility thresholds, the eligibility thresholds under the income test and the asset test for 3 years from 2017 onwards. It is actually, it does make a significant difference, but it does so in a very gradual way that eases the transition into that particular more sustainable pension arrangement.
Okay, just leaving budget matters alone for a while. Obviously, you've got plenty of work to do in the lead up to this second budget. But as a Western Australian senator, I just wanted to test you out on the Barnett government's controversial moves to shut down 100 or more very small, remote Indigenous communities. Obviously, this is what triggered the big controversy last week with Prime Minister Tony Abbott's comments. Can you tell me whether the Barnett government in Western Australia is actually driven in this exercise by saving money? Is saving money from the budget the most important priority, or is this a reform that's actually directed at delivering better outcomes, better services for Indigenous Australians?
Well, I would say both. I mean, firstly, I mean, you're quite right. It is a matter for the state government. The provision of municipal and essential services into Indigenous communities is very much a matter for state and territory governments. And but I support the decisions the Barnett government has made. I mean, ultimately, what should our objective be? Our objective should be that Indigenous children receive an education, that Indigenous people have the opportunity to work, that Indigenous communities are safe and secure, and obviously there's a limit to how much the taxpayer is able to invest in making sure that is the case in really remote communities. So the state government in Western Australia has made certain decisions in that context, and we support what they're doing.
All right, thanks again for your time, Finance Minister Matthias Cormann.
Always good to talk to you.